Amiga, the first personal computer that gives you a creative edge.
Amigos, the podcast about everything Amiga. Amigos is a proud member of the Throwback Network, your home for quality retro podcasts. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron Dowdy and John Bodovkar Schaller.
Joining me in this first Amigos interview is Rob Flack O'Hara. I first got to know Rob over 10 years ago on the Retro Gaming Roundtable forums, and I've kept up with him over the years by listening to his podcasts. Rob is the host of a few retro-themed podcasts like You Don't Know Flack and Sprite Castle, which is a C64 podcast, and he's also the founder of the Throwback Network, which is an affiliation of retro-themed podcasts that Amigos is part of. Rob, hello, and thanks for coming on Amigos.
Hello, how you doing? I think you misspoke. You said 10 years. Has it been that long?
It's been longer than 10 years.
Oh, my gosh. I feel so. Every day I find something that makes me feel a little older, and so you just did that for me today. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to, when I first started posting on Digital Press, it was 2004. So, and I know you were already there at that time, so.
Yeah, I think I got on maybe... just maybe a year before that. I hadn't been on there very long. I had was looking for... Someone told me that there were retro game conventions, and I had never heard of such a thing. I thought that I lived on this island, that I was the only guy in the world that had a Commodore 64 still hooked up, that had all these old video games and stuff. And so I searched Google, and I found some posts from Phosphor.Fossils, our friend Earl Green, and they were on Digital Press, and it was about the Oklahoma Video Game Expo that was taking place that year. So that was kind of how I found Digital Press and found all these people that, like you said, 10, 11, 12 years ago, we're all still talking. We're all still nerdy.
Yeah, that was actually the first. And I actually, you know what? Thinking back, I went to Classic Gaming Expo 2K3. So I was already a member by then. So it must have been 2001 or 2002. Was it when we were still? Were you on the roundtable when we were still on Easy Board?
No, I think I came on right after they had switched forum software.
Okay, yeah, I was right there at the tail end too. So we probably got on about the same time. But I posted on the Usenet forums, classic gaming forums, but I'd never found a place that was kind of all-encompassing classic gaming that was just so awesome. It was a great community back then.
Yeah, I always have people would ask me, when did you get into the retro hobby? And I never had a good answer for that because I never got out of it. Like a lot of the Atari cartridges that I have are the ones I owned when I was 5 years old. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like I just woke up one day feeling nostalgic. It was like I didn't get rid of a lot of the things I had, And so it's funny how you could be such a big fish in a small pond.
Absolutely.
I was just talking to someone about this, about collecting Star Wars stuff. I have a pretty sizable collection of Star Wars toys and all kinds of things. I was the biggest Star Wars collector that all my friends knew. Like everybody at school, everybody on the bus, even now, like at work, I'm the Star Wars guy.
Sure.
And then you go on the internet, and I find these people that, like I'll say, oh, I have the rare Luke with a, certain helmet, like the helmet, and then somebody will say, yeah, my buddy has, an actual helmet that they used in the film.
And all of a sudden, it's not quite as cool what you have anymore.
It definitely changes. When you get on the internet, and that size of that goldfish bowl changes. So I was always the guy that had all the video game systems, all the the most games, the most cartridges, the biggest software collection, all those things. And then you go on Digital Press. They used to have the Room of Doom. I'm sure you remember that section. I think it started in the magazine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the zine.
Right, and then it had moved to the website, but it was they featured someone's game room, and I start looking through these, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm a small fish again. You know what I mean?
Right, and that was also about the same time when the shift from going to thrift stores shifted over to people really getting into eBay and spending lots and lots of money on eBay just trying to acquire everything.
Man, I have I have lamented that so much, and I'm sure like our parents, like you hear these stories and they say, unless you were there in the 50s, you'll just never understand, that sort of thing. And unless you were into retro video games, retro computers during that era, I don't think you'll ever understand that little time frame where I used to go during my lunch break. There's a thrift store right down the street, and I probably bought 4 or 5 Atari 2600 consoles, and I would leave the prices on them because they would write like in that little grease pencil.
Yep. I've still got the stuff marked with that same pencil. And
they say, I have my 1541 Commodore disk drive that I use today has the price right on the top. It says $1.98. And I would go down there and there would be, I bought an Apple computer, I bought Commodore stuff, just all kinds of things. I went one time and there was a hefty trash bag full of floppy disks for $3. And I was like, I'll take, and that was like, a week's worth of entertainment going on.
Yeah, that is unbelievable. I also think it's quite funny that they chose to present that collection of discs just by dumping everything into a hefty bag.
Right. I look like the ghetto Santa Claus walking out. I have this clear bag over my shoulder full of, used discs. But it was like they flipped a switch. It went to eBay, and now, of course, with Craigslist and people, all of a sudden, everybody thought they were going to get rich.
Right. And it really is a double-edged sword, because the great thing about eBay is if you want one specific thing, you can get it immediately.
Sure, absolutely.
But at the same time, the days of walking into a thrift store and just, you never knowing what you'll get, but whatever you do get, you're going to get for cheap. Those days are gone.
Right, yeah, there was no rarity guide, per se back then. It wasn't this, what was rare was the games I didn't have when I was growing up. Like, I thought Pitfall 2 was really rare.
Right.
Because I had
never
Pitfall
saw it.
1.
Yeah.
And then you would go, to a store and you found that for $1 or $2 and you felt like you had this great score, and now you go online and, oh, well, let me look at my price guide. Let me see what that's worth. It's not what's it worth to you or whatever. Yeah, it really did. It turned it into a business.
Yeah. And, speaking of it being a business, it did turn into a business literally for the founder of Digital Press, who has that game shop now up in Jersey.
Yeah, and the museum. The museum is the video game. I guess that got started with a Kickstarter. They got some money through there, and so the national. I think it's just called the National Video Game Museum. I'm not sure what the official name is, but it's down when it opens. It's just outside of Dallas, which is like 3.5 hour drive for me. So I've been seeing pictures slowly show up on Facebook. I want to go check it out. When it becomes open, just because, from knowing those guys for so long.
Oh, yeah. But now, actually, you know a lot more about this than I do. So is Joe actually going to close the store in Jersey and move all his operations down there?
No, he has moved down to Texas, but someone is still running the store in New Jersey. So.
Okay.
I've been to the store. I went to the store one time. I don't know if you've ever been up there.
I've been there once. Luckily, it was one of the times that they were not robbed, because that apparently happens all the time.
Yeah, I was on a work trip somewhere nearby, and I drove out there and got to see the whole, the basement where like all the cool stuff was,
right.
and roam around. And I don't, what I bought was this is the dumbest thing. It's so overwhelming when you walk into a place like, when you go to a garage sale and you find like 2 or 3 things, it's easy to pick one or buy all 3,
right.
I mean, if it's cheap. You walk into a vintage video game store that has 10,000 games and it's just overwhelming. So I stood there and I ended up buying a Mario hat.
That's what you walked away out of all those games and anything you could have got. That's what. Yep. I came really close to buying a Vectrix when I was there.
Ooh, yeah.
But I just didn't pull the trigger. At the time I went up there, I wasn't in the best shape financially, and I couldn't justify it to myself, But it was a wonderful experience. The store was it was fantastic. And before then, I would go up, and I actually went up to one of the, I think they were called Navas. And they actually used to meet at Joe's house before he had the store. And I went up there, and Joe's basement looked like the store. And so it was neat to see him move all that stuff out and into a retail atmosphere. But
Yeah, those are fun because, and I've never been to one of those specifically, those NAVA meetings, but those types of gatherings are fun because I find, especially the older I get and the more people I interact with, I find that everybody is an expert behind the keyboard. You know what I mean? Like you ask somebody, oh, well, this game came out in 1985, and then you get 10, I'll get emails all the time from my podcast. Well, actually, it was 1984, but it was, December 31st, and it was only 9:30 p.m. So,
right.
That sort of thing. But then when you get in a room with those people, and you can instantly see the people that have put in the time, that have that knowledge and the expertise, and then the people that don't. And not, I'm not slamming anybody that's not an expert on anything like that, but I just find that a lot of people will run to their phone or their computer or whatever to go digging for facts, and it's always interesting to me to see those people that and a lot of them were because they were alive during that time. They grew up like I'll hear these podcasts where someone will say, well, I don't remember if that came out for the Intellivision or not, but like when I was a kid, I remember. No, it didn't. That's why I stuck with the Atari, because it wasn't available, So when you have that connection to those systems,
you can
you have
place
those
it in
memories.
a context, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think that's why so much of this stuff, like I have all the old computers and stuff like that, but the Commodore is the one that I had, for the longest time span, and I have the most memories with. So even the same game, if it's available on multiple systems, I'll probably gravitate to that the Commodore version.
Would you like to comment on this week's episode? Did John and Aaron finally make their first mistake? Leave us a comment at our blog at amigospodcast.com.
Well, unfortunately, even though the C64 is your favorite, I'm here to talk to you about one of your other favorite systems. I hope, the Amiga. So, what was your first exposure to the Amiga?
Well, I will take you back to this story, and this takes place 1985 through 1986. That was kind of the time where home computers were really taking off. In the early 80s, you had the Apple IIs, you had the PC Junior come out, and it was always like these people that, it wasn't like normal families didn't have computers. It was like a computer type person had a personal computer, but right in those mid 80s, things really kind of started taking off, where it wasn't just rich people, or it wasn't people, a lot of people I knew were friends of my dad who they used an IBM at work, so they wanted to get a PC at home so they could continue, doing that. So you had to have a reason to justify it. It wasn't really just, because you wanted a computer for no reason. It was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
And so my parents saw this developing, and so they opened a computer store, a local computer store called Yukon Software. I live in Yukon, Oklahoma, and so Yukon Software was exactly like it sounds. It was a computer software store, and it did not cater to the Amiga. It was a PC, Apple II, and Commodore. So we had three big shelves, and my dad likes to, whenever I ask him, what happened to the business? Like, why did it fail within a year? And he says, when he started that, there wasn't anywhere to buy blank discs in Yukon. And a year later, you could get blank discs and games and everything else at Walmart and Target, and those places, saw that need as well. So he acted a little bit sooner than they did, but financially he could not match their finances.
Yeah.
He used to tell me there was a game, I think it was Alternate Reality, and he showed me this game, and he paid $35 for it from this magazine, like a resale, type magazine. So he would pay it for $35, and the manufacturer retail selling price was $40. So he'd make $5 profit. And then we went over to Walmart, and they had it for $32. So they were selling it cheaper than he could buy it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and you can't compete with that. It's impossible.
No. Right. We did the same thing where he was buying floppy disks for about, I think, 80 cents each, something like that. And then he was selling for $1 each, so you're making 20 cents.
So not a lot of margin there.
No. And then Walmart, started, selling them for $5 for 10. So he would go to Walmart, buy them, and then he would put like shareware and free public domain software on it and sell them for $1 each, So it just wasn't sustainable, So anyway, the business closed and we had all this inventory left and nowhere to sell it and nothing to do. So, they used to have these computer, like kind of like a smaller version of a I don't know what you call it, like a gathering of computer enthusiasts. People would sell stuff. People would have tables.
Kind of like a little convention / trade show /
Yeah. I guess trade show is probably a good term for it, And so, so we went to a couple of these, and my mom, we had all this software that had price tags on it, $35, $40, and there would be new, like, garage sale stickers that would say $5. They were literally just trying to get out, get rid of the inventory and stuff. And so we went to one of these one time, and my mom was working this table, and I was supposed to, kind of sit there and help her. And right next to us were the local Amiga computer users group. And so I had never seen an Amiga in person before. I subscribed to a couple different Commodore magazines, so I had seen, pictures. I think everybody had seen, the Amiga juggler, like, stills from it, but to see Amigas set up on that table and see that, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. The graphics and the sound at that time. Now, I was a Commodore guy because the Commodore 64 was so much better than all the other competition. PCs at the time had, 4 colors. My dad, he used to always joke, he would say, the PC does 4 colors as long as 2 of them are black and white, so they weren't really known for their color quality. And the early Apple that we had, we just had a monochrome monitor. Later on we had I think it would do 6 colors in the high res. So the Commodore 64 was above and beyond everything else, and of course, the sound was so much better.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at this Amiga, and they're running demos on it. They're running, they're playing mod files in stereo, and I was just amazed. They were showing this game called Mindwalker. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it was kind of a pseudo 3D looking thing. I mean, if I had to describe it, I would say it looks similar, I guess, to Crystal Castles, like that kind of.
Isometric.
It wasn't really, well, not really, but 3D, like almost like Clax.
Okay.
Like that 3D kind of thing. And you were a guy, a little wizard, and you moved around, and there was this lightning effect where you would attack things and lightning would go off and stuff, and it was just incredible looking, and just so far above anything that I had seen on any of the 8-bit machines, So I watched that for a while, and they had Marble Madness, which, again, the Commodore 64, I wouldn't say was arcade quality per se, but it was better than everybody else. Like you would say, it's not as good as the arcade, but it was better than the Apple guys, like that sort of thing,
Right.
And then seeing it on the Amiga, at least through my eyes at the time, I was like, this looks just like the arcade game. Like, it was just indiscernible.
Oh, yeah. We just did that on the Amigos. That was on the, I think, episode 2. And really, aside from very, very small differences, it is arcade quality. It was very impressive, especially for a game. I think Marble Madness came out in, like you said, 85 or 86. It was a very early Amiga title.
And the sound and the little touches, like to the animation and things like that, that really, it really sold me. And I wanted an Amiga so bad, but I didn't have the money for one at the time, and
now take us back to the prices in the mid 80s. What was a Commodore selling for at that time?
Well, when the Commodore launched, I believe it launched at $5.99. That would have been like, what, 82?
Okay.
And then the next year it was like $2.99. I mean, it dropped like in half right off the bat. And then the prices continued to drop as more people moved to the PC. The goal of Commodore was always to get the Commodore into as many people's households as they could, you know. So I mean, I remember for a long time it being, you know, like $199, $149, like that kind of price range, but you could always find them used for like $100. I think mine was I actually got mine free because the sound chip, the SID chip had burned up, and so we got it free, and the person said, you know, if you repair it, you could have it, you know, that sort of thing. So as more people, IBM kind of came off with the I guess they had the persona, like they were the more business-like computer, and so as business, you know, people bought, you know, they had all these commercials. If you've ever seen these goofy commercials of guys on the Commodore, they're like, I'm running my business. Like you're doing a spreadsheet in 40 columns.
Something that nobody would ever do in a million years in actual real life, yeah.
Right, you know, they're like, I'm doing my taxes, you know, and if you've ever tried to do productivity stuff on a Commodore 64, my friend, his mother bought this software that was like to manage your bowling league, and it was horrible, you know, and so you'd put all the players like for each team and scores, and after you do so, it would just crash. It would throw you out of the basic, you know, just say error, you know, and so yeah, it definitely wasn't you know, a productivity type machine, but you know, the PC was obviously did that, and so when people were like, oh yeah, I can't really, you know, do a newsletter, I can't do these things I want to do, and they upgraded, then the Commodore, it always had that, and I need to be sure that I say Commodore 64, because when I say Commodore, that's usually what I'm referring to, and I forget that I'm on an Amiga show, so I need to be sure to differentiate that. But yeah, they were almost seen like toys, you know, and so you could get them pretty inexpensively.
Yeah, I think, you know, the lower price point combined with the vast amount of games that were available for the system, you know, it's easy to see how it developed that reputation.
Yeah, you could go Toys R Us had a Commodore area, you know, along with all the other video games. You could go buy Commodore games and stuff like that. Now, I had a friend who his name is Justin, and he worked at McDonald's, and he was always saving his money and buying all this stuff, and so he actually bought an Amiga 500. No, I'm going to take that back. He bought an Amiga 1000. This is before the 500 was out, and I remember I went over to his house. So this would have been, 87, 88, somewhere around there, and he showed me. There was a shareware version of Asteroids, but the Asteroids had been pre-rendered to where they almost looked like they were 3D.
Oh,
you know,
so they
almost
kind of tumble or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it looked like in my mind, it looked like Blasteroids, if you've ever seen that, you know. But this was just some shareware game, you know, and you used a mouse, which I wasn't used to playing games with a mouse at that point. That was kind of new. But I remember seeing that and thinking, you know, this is incredible. I mean, this is the future, you know. And he had this huge stack of 3.5-inch discs where he had downloaded pictures, and so he was like, hey, watch this, you know, and he puts this disc in, and you know, he clicks on a file, and you know, the drives going back and forth, and you wait, I don't know, 15-20 seconds, and then finally this picture of a Lamborghini comes up, and we were like, that is awesome. And it's not a real picture, you know, it's a drawing, and someone has done this artwork, you know.
It's really hard for people that didn't grow up at that time, you know, to know how cool that a picture like that would look coming off a computer when all you had seen up to that point was either CGA graphics on a PC or, you know, something on a Commodore or an Atari 8-bit, something like that.
Right. We actually dialed up, you know, he was like, well, let's call this BBS, and we call this BBS, and we go to the picture file area, and you go there, and there's all these file names, you know, ice cream cone, Mount Rushmore, you know, all these things that it was like, oh, this ice cream cone sounds cool. And so we download it, and you wait 5 minutes, you know, and it's saving to the disk. And then, you know, finally it's all done, and you log off, and then you double click, and then a picture of an ice cream cone, and you're like, that's awesome too. These are all awesome. And he had downloaded discs, and we would spend all this time just looking at dumb pictures that people had drawn, you know, which, you know, like you said, now, you know, I go into an ice cream place and I take a picture with my phone, and then I'd click, send that to Facebook, and it's not a drawing. It's like a real picture of an ice cream
right.
cone. But it just seems so amazing, that the graphic quality.
Are you enjoying the Amigos podcast? If so, please take a moment to write us a review on iTunes. iTunes is how most people discover podcasts, and by writing a review, you'll help us get to the top of the retro gaming and computing section. Thanks!
It was just this weird time where my buddy was the hold and modify mode. Are you familiar with that? Did that have like 4,096 colors?
Right.
I think
That was that special graphics mode that only the Amiga had.
And it would flicker, so he had this thing that hung on his monitor. It was like a thing of tint or something. I don't know. But so it was like, if you put this on, it'll flicker less, and you would download these pictures. And so I don't know. It just seemed like that was the future. Like I was like, someday I'll be telling my kids about this, that we, saw this great picture of a tiger or something. I don't know. It just seems so far advanced from everything else, and he, this is a funny story. I went over to his house one time. My wife, we were dating at the time, and he had just got Pinball Fantasies. I know you guys just talked about pinball games. On the podcast recently, and it wasn't that first-person pinball game.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a very good thing.
Right. And so we had been playing it off and on a couple times, and I'm just going to make up the numbers, but, whatever it was, our scores were comparable. He would get 3 million, I would get 3,000,001, that sort of thing. Like we were going back and forth, but we were really close in our scores. And so I don't know what happened, but we were playing this game, and I did something, and all of a sudden the bonus started going off, and things are flashing, and my score is just going up by the millions. I mean, it goes, 3 million, 4, 5, 10. I mean, it's going through the roof. And we've never seen anything like this. And I start laughing uncontrollably, and I'm laughing so hard that I almost, like I'm falling out of the chair, and I guess I've never had this happen, but I think I started to faint. Because
Really?
I was laughing so hard that I was like, I could, like, you get that tunnel vision, and I was like, I feel myself going out. And so my friend was like trying to reach the keyboard to keep the game going, but I thought he was trying to mess me up, like trying to like sabotage the game. So as I'm like falling out of the chair, like, no, like it's all slow motion, and I'm hitting his hands, and the high score was like 40 million after that or something. Like, I don't even know what happened, but it was like just one of those weird glitch in the Matrix, type games or whatever. But yeah, he was my Amiga buddy, so he would get whatever was new. And I remember he got Dragon's Lair when that came out. And now if you go back and play it now, I mean, it's not great. You know what I mean? There's a lot of disk loading and disk swapping and stuff like that. But compared to what was on any 8-bit system, or the Commodore 64 version, that NES one, which is just
not even the same game at all. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, they had to make something that would work on that architecture, and so to see it, it just really was light years ahead of anything else.
Now, when did you actually get your own Amiga?
Not for a long time. In fact, I don't know if you remember Brad Prilwitz. He was on Digital Press, and he passed away. Boy, you'd ask me that. I'd have to look it up.
No problem.
I think it might have been Brad something.
Okay.
But he passed away a few years ago. He was actually, I think a drunk driver hit him head on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but he is from Oklahoma. And we had met up at one of the Oklahoma video game expos, and we were talking shop, and he was just a super nice guy, just one of those really nice guys. And he had an Amiga 500, and he said, I have the computer, I have the Amiga 520, which is the little composite video adapter that plugs in, and I have some discs. So if you're interested, and I think it was like $50, maybe $100, whatever it was a really good deal, and he said, well, when I come to the city, we'll meet up. So we met up, and he pulls his computer out of the trunk, and he pulls, this little box of joysticks and cables. And then he pulls out this disc box that's holding 100 discs. And I'm like, wow. And he goes, well, hang on, I got more in the back seat. And then he pulls out, 200 discs and 300 discs and 400 discs. And they're in the passenger seat. They're in the whole back of the car. It's just, I probably got at least 500 floppies in this deal, which I was super excited about. And then later, when I figured out enough how to, actually operate the computer, they were all archive discs, and they were all public domain stuff from some local computer group. So there was not a single good game on any of them. It was like so-and-so's tax calculator, like all this crappy stuff, little basic things that would, guess the number too high, too low, stupid stuff like that. So there really wasn't any good software with it, but yeah, that was the first one. And that, like I said, that was probably 2003, 2004. Mm-hmm. Now since then, before the prices shot through the roof, I bought an Amiga 1200, which I still have hooked up in here, but I don't use it that much. I'll tell you why in a minute. And then I bought a Amiga CD32, which is basically the consoleized version of I guess of the 500. And there's a lot of games. I mean, they make the same games. They just put it on CD or whatever, and it plays on the CD32. They port stuff back and forth, but it seemed easier at the time than downloading these games from the internet and trying to figure out how to transfer them over and do all these crazy things. So I got that CD32 and played with that for a while. But now I went. You were talking about thrift stores. I went to this thrift store, and this was, gosh, I don't know, within a year of that, like 2005, maybe something like that. And I was poking around in the monitors. I'd always go back and look at the TVs and the monitors, and there's this monitor back there that says Commodore on it, which of course jumped out at me, being a lifelong Commodore fan. And I see this monitor, and I'm like, and I start thinking it's with all the other PC monitors, so I'm just thinking in my head oh, that's when Commodore started making PC stuff, and so it's just an IBM monitor with a PC brand on it. So I just left it, Mm-hmm. And I get home, and I was talking to a buddy of mine, and I was like, yeah, I saw the weirdest thing, and then he said, it was probably an Amiga monitor. And I'm like, oh, it didn't even dawn on me. Right. I didn't even put two and two together. And I went the next day, during lunch, I went the next day, and it was gone.
Oh, man.
And I was almost hysterical, like the guy comes out from the back, that guy that works there and could not give two craps about you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yep,
at the thrift store. And I'm like, it was right here. He's like, yeah, well, it's not now. So it must be gone. I'm like, well, you go look in the back. He's like, why would somebody take a monitor and put it in the back? I was like, I don't know. I'm looking in the women's clothing area. Maybe somebody moved it. Just anything. I've kicked myself for that. I would buy, Commodore made calculators and adding machines and things like that. I would buy one of those. If I saw a Commodore calculator, I would buy that. I can't believe I didn't buy that stupid thing. As you, I don't know if you guys have talked about this on the show or not, but Amiga used that weird, was it 15 kilohertz? I always get it mixed up. Megahertz.
We haven't. I think it's kilohertz.
The
refresh that you're talking about, the refresh rate.
Right. Yeah. So they don't play nice with modern monitors, which are looking for that 31 refresh rate. So if you don't have an Amiga monitor, they could kind of be like you. What do you have your Amiga hooked up to?
Well, the dirty secret of this podcast is that I don't actually have an Amiga yet.
Ah, okay.
But Aaron has an Amiga, and he's got an Amiga monitor, but I don't know what model number it is, but it is
Right.
an Amiga monitor.
Well, see, and that's the thing. If you don't have an Amiga, and if you go online, you can find these lists. NEC made a series of monitors that they call multi-sync monitors, and there's a specific list of those that will work with the Amiga. But other than that, it's really hard to do. Now there are the thing that I got from Brad is called it's a 520. It plugs into the user port in the back of the Amiga, and it does composite out. So you can run then because the composite out on the actual Amiga is not really composite out. It's only black and white. So you can plug this thing, and it looks like an external modem, like an old external modem. You plug it into the back, and then you get composite out, which is okay for games, but not really for 80-column text.
Right.
It's pretty blurry and stuff. So now I just today saw a link to a guy, and what is this thing called? It's the AMIV, AMIV 2.0, which plugs into that same port on the back of an Amiga and has HDMI out.
Wow.
So that if that thing comes out and it's any sort of reasonable price at all, that's going to be a game changer for a lot of people.
Yeah, the monitor issue is just such a headache for anybody that's into retro consoles at all.
Yeah.
Because CRT TVs, you may still have them, but they're not, they're huge. They're hard to put somewhere that's not conspicuous. If more consoles start coming up with solutions to getting, an HDMI signal out or some sort of a, digital signal out, it'll be huge.
I had on my retro little computer area, I had my Commodore 64, an Apple II, my Amiga 1200. Something else, maybe a console or two sitting there, and I had all these monitors lined up, and so you turn them on, and then of course, all of a sudden your game room's 80 degrees, right. You got this stuff running, and then I thought, this is silly, so I got rid of. Well, I don't get rid of anything, but I moved those down to the garage, and I went to go buy a flat screen monitor, and unfortunately. This isn't always the case, but when I got down, I went to Sam's, and I was looking for like a 24-inch flat screen, and they had them for like, I don't know, $149, something like that, and then right next to that is the 27-inch for $159. I'm like, well, that's not a bad deal, and then right here you're like, oh, well, here's a 32-inch for $199. That's, and so I come home with a 42-inch Samsung flat screen.
Just monster, yeah.
Right, and so I didn't even think about it, but when I set it on my desk, I mean, I don't know if you've ever typed in 40 columns on a 40-inch monitor. That's
I have never done that.
Away. Right, but it's almost like when people type and the caps lock is on,
just screaming at you from the screen, yeah.
Right, you're like, load, dollar sign. I mean, it's just giant letters, and so I didn't really think that one through. But what I lost in all that was my Amiga video, because all of a sudden I couldn't hook up to this thing anymore, and refresh rates being all a little different, and so if this thing really works, this HDMI deal or whatever, I'm going to be super stoked about that.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite game for the Amiga?
Favorite game? Well, my favorite genre, I would say, is platform type games. Now, I recently, I'll tell you what I bought, and it's probably been a year ago, but I bought a Myst. Do you know what that is?
I've heard you talk about it, but I feel like a lot of listeners may not be aware of it. So why don't you explain what it is?
Yeah, well, it's an FPGA computer, which basically what that means, it's flashable. So if you think of normal electronics, and by the way, I don't know how to do any of this. It's just what I've read. I like to sound smart by quoting, Wikipedia or whatever. But so basically, like a normal computer would have a CPU that would have, that's physically made, like a die and all that stuff, right? A flashable one is just like what it sounds. You can take the code from a processor or something and flash it, and then that machine becomes that computer. Now,
okay.
So you're going to lose some quality or some speed, so you can't, just flash this thing and have it be a Pentium 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with the current technology and stuff, it can easily handle what they call them cores. So you get the core, which is basically the programming set that went into these 8-bit computers or whatever, and you flash the device with that core, and it becomes that device. Now, where it's different than emulation, because emulation is there's that interpretive layer.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you're still riding on top of your contemporary operating system.
Exactly. So with a like an Amiga emulator, you're playing the game, and the emulator is figuring out what the graphics, how to process that, and then it has to convert that to Windows or Mac or whatever you're running the emulator on, and then display it to your monitor.
Yeah.
Well, these FPGA computers cut out that middleman. There is no overlying operating system or anything. When you flash those instruction sets on there, it becomes that computer. Now, the MIST is this little ugly looking black box, like a project box that you would buy at Radio Shack or something. It is not flashy looking at all. There's some USB ports on the back, so you can hook up a keyboard and a mouse, and on the side there's 2 DB9 joystick ports, so you can hook up regular joysticks.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the front there's an SD card slot, so you put whatever core you want to flash this machine as, put it in there, and if it's not, if the core that's on there is different than what your machine is, it will reflash it, but if it's the same, it just ignores it. But MIST, that stands for Amiga and Atari ST, the MI in MIST.
Oh, interesting. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, and ST is Atari ST. So those were the first 2 cores that they came up with. If you've heard of the Mini MIG, or the little mini Amiga that they came out with, this is basically the same core that's used in that. So
Okay.
it is a completely functional Amiga computer. Now, you're still using a PC USB keyboard and a regular USB mouse plugged into this device, but as far as it's concerned, it thinks it's an Amiga. The advantage to this thing is you can load and mount ADF disk images right off of the SD card. So any of the disk images that you would find online of Amiga games, things like that, you just throw them on the SD card, and
it works just like a if you have a flash card for whatever retro system you have, it basically, yeah.
Yep, exactly. And and I would say it's 95% compatible. There are always the programmers back then were so crafty with coming up with little hardware tricks and video modes that may not have been documented. And so, if you find a game that does that, well, if it wasn't documented, it's probably not in the core set either. And so, there have been a few things I found that don't run, but for the most part. So I've been doing most of my Amiga playing on that until now. If this, like I said, that HDMI thing comes out, then I'll probably, hook my 1200 back up and go back to that, because I'd rather do it. I always think it's better on the real system, if you could do it. But, on the Commodore 64, we have the 1541 Ultimate, which is that little, the SD card basically reader. On my Apple II, I have a same thing that reads discs from a USB stick. So it's just those old floppies are getting so unreliable, that if I could come up with something where I could, play the USB, images off of a USB stick and on a real TV, I'd love to do that. That is a really long answer that did not answer what games I'm playing right now. But I am a fan of 16-bit platform games. I think platform games are my favorite style of game, which is why I'm not so much into modern gaming anymore. I thought I'll probably get shot for this from certain people, but I thought like Mario 64 when it came out was a neat trick. You know what I mean? And I thought Doom was an okay game. I did not realize we would be playing Doom for 25 more years.
I don't think anybody did.
And people are like, well, this is Quake, which, it had some advancements, but, this is whatever.
You're still iterating on the same theme.
Right. This is Shooter 2000. And I go, well, I've seen this. They go, no. In this one, you can crawl. Okay, well, that's the same game to me. That's
right.
That's not a revolutionary step forward. On this one, you could change, left-handed or right-handed. Okay, I'm over it. So I like, seeing those type of games, but they pretty much killed my favorite genre. That you don't see those basic platform games. I just found Zool. I had played Zool, I think, on the PC as a kid, which is a platform game, and you're this cute little green ninja-looking guy. Yep. I just started playing Super Frog again, which is another platform game, and Shadow of the Beast, I don't think I ever played before.
Oh, really? That's surprising.
I just found that. So I just kind of been going through and seeing some of those platform games. And there's another one I just found, Pushover. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's a it's I guess I would say it's in almost, it doesn't look like it, but it's in the puzzle solving kind of genre, and so basically you're a little guy and you set up a line of dominoes and you have to push them over, and then so kind of like Lemmings or any of those games where then on the next level, okay, now there's something you have to do, and there'll be a gap where the dominoes won't hit the next one, so you got to go get a domino and then move it into the spot, and then later on, there's like little elevators and slopes and all these different things you have to figure out, how to circumvent or whatever. But that's what I like about these old systems. Everybody knows, The Last Ninja. Everybody knows Outrun. You know what I mean? Like there are those games that, Marble Madness we mentioned that everybody knows that they associate with the system. But I don't know how big the Amiga game library is. I know for the Commodore 64, the estimates right now are around 20,000 titles.
Unbelievable.
So that's a lot of backlog to go through. Like when people say like, oh, have you played, this or that? I'm like, I got a lot of old stuff to go through. Like I'm not done with all the old stuff, So that's the cool thing for me is having, since I didn't have an Amiga when I was a kid, but just being so in love with it, I just find that there's so many games out there that, and each one is not a 10 out of 10.
Sure. Yeah. You're going to have bad games no matter what system you're playing.
Right. And so I'll I try one and I try to give it, an honest take. That's another thing. I'm sure you've run into this as well. I remember as a kid, like my buddy, I would go over to his house. He had an Atari 2600 and he only had like 4 games. And I don't know where they must have got their games to like the basement bargain. Like he had some crappy games, like I don't even know if he had combat. Like, like I remember we went over and he had 2 or 3 games and we ended up playing Sneak and Peek.
Sneak and Peek, yeah. Terrible.
which is a hide and seek game. I've always had this thing: never play a video game that you can do in real life.
Right.
That's why I don't like bowling video games because I can really. I mean, I'm not good at bowling, but I can do it.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So anyway, if he only had these 2 or 3 games, but you would still play them. Now, if you went to someone else's house and they had 10 great games and Sneak and Peek, you're not going to play hide and seek on the Atari. It's the worst of all those games or whatever. So the problem when you get to like where we are now with emulation and computers and stuff is I just got a Harmony cart not too long ago, which is a Atari 2600 cartridge that lets you put an SD card in and play games off of that, right? So I thought, well, I'll go download, some Atari games. And I Google that, and the first thing I find is a zip file that says every Atari 2600 game ever made. It's like 20 meg, I go, okay. I click on it and cable modem. It's done in like 3 seconds,
Right.
And I zip it on the card. Well, guess what? I'm not playing Sneak and Peek. I'm not playing all those bad games because when you get all of them, you kind of the good ones bubble up.
You're going to gravitate towards the good ones all the time,
right?
Yeah.
Right, and
especially because when you're all grown up, you have limited gaming time anyway, so you're going to only want to play the games that are the best.
Right, and unfortunately, like with the Commodore 64, I find I tend to play the ones that I had when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. The nostalgia factor is
Right. I'm like, oh, I remember this game, and I'll play it. And then it dawned on me one day, like, it can't be true that every game I played as a kid was good, and every one I didn't play was terrible.
Yeah.
And so I really wasn't giving them a fair shake. So that's what I like about the Amiga. Like I said, I'm kind of viewing this now with new eyes, and so I'll try one, and even if it's kind of frustrating or doesn't look as good as something out, I really will try to spend the time to figure out how to play it. And before I move on to that, that's not saying I spend a month on each one, but I try to give it a fair. I just a lot of those games, I think people are you get frustrated, and then like I said, you just move on to the next one because you have so many to get through.
Right. Well, we are going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we go?
Oh, just Commodores in general. Commodores are awesome. Amigas are awesome. If you want to find my other podcasts, you can find them at robohara.com/podcasts. That has all my current shows, and the Amigos and my shows and lots of other good retro gaming shows and computer shows are all on throwbacknetwork.net. So you could go there and scroll through the side and see all the shows. I think we're at 30 shows now, 30 different podcasts that are on the network. And I subscribe to every one of them. Some of them I'll skip through or something if it's not an episode that hits me. But I do download every one of them and listen through. There's lots of good shows on there.
Thanks again, Rob. If you'd like to be interviewed for the Amigos podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Send us a message at amigospodcast.com, especially if you live in a country outside of the United States. Between me, Aaron, and Rob, we kind of have the USA perspective. I wouldn't say fully down pat, but we'd love to get a more international perspective on the Amiga scene. So if you live in another country and you'd like us to interview you, once again, our email address is amigospodcast.com, or you can just leave us a note on the blog or the Facebook page. Thanks.